What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network weekly fix here. We're going to be going over everything that is happening in the XFL right now, giving you guys just an overview of everything that's going on right now. There's definitely a lot of news that we've learned from week two, and just some different things happening. Even the NFL right now, going to just keep you guys informed on everything that's happening in case you haven't been keeping your ear to the ground to everything that's happening around the XFL. And I wanted to just have an overall discussion over how I feel that the health of this league is going now. In week one, we saw a pretty solid fan turnout, and then week two, because of the Seattle Dragons attendance, we actually saw that fan turnout go up, technically even more, although it was basically just being inflated by how large the turnout was in Seattle. It dipped a little bit across the other markets, but it was still pretty strong in terms of like the TV markets. It was a definite dip from week one to two, but it wasn't nearly as strong as the dip was from week one to two in the AAF. So I think things overall are looking positive for the XFL, and very excited to see where this league can go from here. Now, there's been a lot of criticism over the quarterback play in the first or in the second week rather, and a lot of that I think is coming from people that watched the Saturday games only and didn't even tune in for the Sunday games, which was kind of unfortunate for the XFL because I think most people tune in on Saturday and then kind of forget about it on Sunday and kind of see a ratings dip on Sunday. But by the time Sunday was over, I would venture to say that a lot of those critiques were not as strong just based on how well some of the games were received on Sunday. But overall, I do think that part of the reason that we're seeing, a lot of the poor offensive play overall definitely has something to do with the quarterback play for sure, but also really has a lot to do with the overall just lack of preparedness of some of these teams. And I mean, they had a very short offseason time coming together, trying to get to know the playbook. A lot of these offensive schemes are pretty basic at this point, and it's probably going to take a few weeks before a lot of these offenses can really gel with one another. So continue to give it time is what I would definitely recommend and say going forward from here. But and really just looking at some of these rule changes, I think that's one reason why people are tuning in. I think there's some really good and some really bad here, and stuff that I would actually hope that the NFL would take over. Now, I would say probably the most positive rule change that I've observed anyway is the transparency that you get in the the replay review. So anytime that there is a play that's being reviewed by the officials, if you guys haven't watched the games yet, basically they will pan to the camera booth where the officials are actually reviewing all of the camera angles, and they turn on the mics that are so basically the mics between the refs and the people in the booth are hot, so you can actually hear them talking to each other. And it's what's really helped, at least I believe that's really helped with that, is just the overall transparency between both the refs and the guys in the booth. It's good to see how they come to the conclusion, and every time that they've done a review like that, I've ended up agreeing with the decision, even if I didn't necessarily think so right away. Being able to see all the different camera angles that they have, or the lack thereof, I think is really helpful, because then you can almost, you can tell right away whether or not they're making a decision based on something outside of the game. A lot of people always accuse decisions made by refs to be rigged, or the game is being called for another team, and it's really nice to be able to see that whole process go through, because again, that transparency also keeps them honest. So I think that's a really positive rule change. I really like the kickoff rule. It definitely hasn't led to nearly as many big kick returns that I was expecting it would have. We still have yet to see anyone score a touchdown on a kick return, but I do like overall just how that has impacted player safety. But one rule change that I definitely don't like, and I think this week definitely showed where it can go wrong very quickly, is interviewing players on the field immediately after the play is over, especially when they're interviewing players after something went wrong. I'm a little bit more sympathetic to doing it when it is like after a player does something good because they're excited, they're amped up. Like they interview a defender after he intercepts the ball or scores a touchdown. Like of course they're excited. That's always going to be pretty cool to see. But when you interview a quarterback right after they throw an interception, that typically doesn't look real good for that person because they're either going to try to give you a solid, composed BS answer that they don't really want to give on camera because internally they're pissed, or they're going to give you the full fronted how much they're pissed off answer, and then everyone's going to criticize them, like we saw on Saturday with Matt McGloin. I mean, I don't really know what exactly you would call what happened with Matt McGloin, but it was pretty much a meltdown in terms of what people on watching the game would consider, and it was pretty depressing, pretty sad to see because Matt McGloin looked pretty decent in week one, and he's this veteran guy, but he's basically calling out his entire team. His coach is throwing them under the bus, and I understand being mad, but that definitely didn't look good for him, and we'll see how this team can respond to this going forward. But overall, I don't think that helps him. I don't think that helps the team, and I definitely don't think it helps the league to see quarterbacks basically just throwing their team under the bus. And yeah, I think that's definitely on him. But I don't know what I would say if you threw a mic in my face after I was getting sacked every other play and I threw an interception after I had a bunch of play calls that I didn't think were going in a proper direction. And if I was playing bad, I'd be mad at myself too. So he definitely needed to take some responsibility for what he was doing. But overall, I don't necessarily think that it's 100% his fault. I think that is kind of the rawness that you can expect when you're going to interview a player immediately after something happens to them. The other big thing that I'm just waiting to see how this pans out as the season goes on is just the overall poor play over in Tampa. Now, before the season started, Tampa was one of the heavy Vegas favorites to actually win the league. They had a 7.5 over under for their win total, which I thought was ridiculous. Just for a new league in general, but I mean, they start the season out 0-2. Now they get to play their first game at home, but they're going against one of the best teams in the Houston Roughnecks. They could easily go 0-3 and already cash out the under for anyone that bet on the under in their win total. And it's just fascinating to me to see how criminally underutilized Quentin Flowers is right now. They have basically just been trying to keep him in basically like using him as a secondary quarterback that would come in, take over a drive every now and then. And very rarely have you seen two quarterbacks on the same field. Like Quentin Flowers is able to, be a runner out of the backfield, or they could use him as a receiver. He's also a good receiver. I also don't understand why they haven't tried to use any double forward pass rule with, like, granted, now with Taylor Cornelius there, hopefully Aaron Murray is back this week, but I mean, there's so much that they could do in that offense, very similar to how the New Orleans Saints use Taysom Hill, and they just haven't been doing it, which is just really surprising to me. And I think if they don't innovate their offense soon enough, this is going to be a completely lost season for them, and that's again also sad because at least as far as the XFL is concerned, you want all the teams to be pretty good overall. So definitely love, like I said, love the replay rule. I love the kickoff rule. The point after rule, I'm still undecided on. We'll see how that ends up turning out once these offenses start gelling a little bit. Right now, I feel like a lot of the teams are just kind of like aimlessly choosing either 1, 2, or 3 point conversion. There's not really much going on in terms of analytics there yet, but should be pretty interesting to see once these teams kind of figure out their offenses. I'm surprised there's not more people that just go for three with the amount of the low percentage of turnover, like not making the 1 point conversion, just like go for three. And if you get it once, then that's making up for the over 50% of the time that you're not making the 1 point. So I wouldn't be surprised if that starts happening, especially with more aggressive offenses like Houston as we go further into the season. Now, a couple of notes from the NFL before we get and finish up with stuff over the XFL. For those of you that saw, Greg Olsen was signed in Seattle for a 1-year deal after being let go from Carolina. It looks like Carolina is really just jettisoning all of their existing veterans right now, which is I still disagree with that decision. I didn't think that it was right for them to fire Ron Rivera in the first place. I think that that is a decision that's going to end up biting them in the butt later on, and we'll see what they end up doing with Cam Newton. But I would say, as of right now, just with how everything is going in Carolina, it would be very surprising if Cam Newton was on that team heading into the 2020 season. So looks like it's going to be a dumpster fire, and I feel really bad for Christian McCaffrey because he's not going to really have a chance to prove to the world that he could be better than Marshall Faulk if he's playing on a team that is just not giving him any help. But should be interesting to see how Greg Olsen plays in Seattle. Russell Wilson definitely likes throwing to the tight end. We saw both Will Disley and Jacob Hollister perform well last year, and I think Greg Olsen, although a bit older, is definitely still talented enough to perform really well in that offense. I think that gives Russell Wilson a really nice target. So pretty excited from a fantasy perspective of what Greg Olsen can do. Not sure how valuable he will actually be, but it might just help boost Russell Wilson's value. And then for those of you that have been following the talk about the new CBA, I'm I don't know. I guess I just don't understand the incessant need to constantly try to bilk more and more money out of fan bases in the NFL, considering how much money they're already making. But right now, with the new CBA, it looks like what they're trying to push for is a 17-game regular season and a 7-team per conference playoff format where you only have one team, the top team would get a bye week, and then the wild card would consist of 3 games for both conferences to whittle down to your 4 for the divisional round. And maybe I'm just a curmudgeon. Maybe this is just something that I don't understand, but I feel like that just cheapens the entire experience of the whole season. When you add a game, you're basically increasing the risk of significant injuries to your players. I mean, every single time a player goes onto the football field, they risk a season-ending injury, and by adding a game, you're just adding a greater chance that a star player will end up getting hurt towards the end of the year. And then in terms of increasing the playoff teams, I feel like it just overall cheapens the experience. I mean, typically there's not even 12 teams that are capable of competing for a Super Bowl in the first place, so why would you want to expand that to 14? I think someone showed an article that like in the past 10 years, expanding the playoffs to 7 teams would have permitted 5 10 and 6 teams to make the playoffs, which sounds really good, but it would have also brought in 6 8-win teams. And I think one of the reasons why the NFL has been so successful, especially in terms of their viewership in the playoffs and throughout the regular season, is it's made every game mean something. When you lose a game, it can really hurt you at the end of the season. And the more that you bring everyone to parity by like expanding the playoffs and expanding the regular season, it just takes away from that weight of each individual game, and it makes the wins mean less and the losses mean less. And overall, I just think that's not the correct approach, but again, I'm not the one that's writing the rules. So tell me what you guys think about that. Before we get back to the XFL, I just wanted to rant about that a little bit. So let's go through some of the news and notes that have come out across the XFL this week. A couple different interesting things here. We keep getting some more betting information. This is almost a repeat from last week in terms of the over-unders on Vegas side of things have been very inflated across the XFL over the course of the first 2 weeks. We've only seen the over hit twice, and both of those games were with Houston playing. So at this point, it's very surprising to see that the over-unders are still in the 40s, but they have dropped. I mean, the first week they were all up in the 50s, and now I think the highest over-under on the week is about 45, and it's still dipping a bit as the week goes on. So not surprised to see that. It will probably kind of have like a reverse effect as the unders begin to, or the over-unders begin to creep lower. We're going to start to see more scoring as these teams begin to, find their rhythm in the offense. Because again, we didn't really have a true preseason in the XFL. A couple of the main starting quarterbacks missed a decent portion of the the offseason that was there due to injury with Landry Jones and Josh Johnson. So I think that we're just going to overall see a trend towards more scoring as the season goes on. So if you're in the betting market and you're playing over unders, you're probably safe to continue hitting the under for the next couple of weeks, but just keep an eye on that trend as they continue to dip down. Pretty soon, the overs are going to start to hit like crazy. And then they also made a interesting note here. I think it's just the way that the schedule has gone, but the home teams have dominated against the spread as well. Home teams are actually 6-2, and honestly, the only time that the home team didn't hit the spread were the two games involved with the Dallas Renegades. But I think again, a lot of that had to do with the lack of Landry Jones in Week 1, and then obviously they won on the road in Week 2. So I'm not putting too much faith into this yet, because like this week is a really telling time for home teams, because I think it's looking like, for the most part, I would expect 3 away teams to win this week, because you have Houston going to Tampa Bay. Now this is Tampa Bay's first home game, and it's Houston's first game going on the road, but I think that Houston is going to win that game pretty easily. Maybe not easily. I think Tampa Bay can definitely hang in there, but I think Houston will end up winning that one. You also have Dallas traveling to Seattle, and I think Dallas is a far superior team. So that would be both games on Saturday favoring the away team. And then on Sunday, you also have DC traveling to LA. DC is the best team in the XFL right now, and of course anyone could lose, but I would be surprised if DC lost to LA this week. So don't read too much into the fact that home teams have done well thus far. Let's jump over. I really like this article the XFL posts every week. I believe they're partnering with PFF to just get us some deeper stats into what is going on around each team. Last week they gave us 3. This week they only gave us 1, but this is really important, especially from a fantasy perspective, a lot of these offensive stats. So Dallas is averaging 2.3 yards per contact per rush attempt, which is the best mark in the XFL. What's interesting, too, is that the Dallas Renegades are actually the team with the least amount of rush attempts on the season. So when they run the ball, they run it really well, but they don't run it very often. But we saw last week what that set up for them in the fourth quarter is whenever Cameron Artis-Payne touched the ball, he was just able to absolutely dominate and destroy. I would look for that to continue again. That's just the way that Bob Stoops wants to run that air raid offense. They throw to set up the run. Same thing in Houston, but it's just working a lot more effectively in Dallas. Which, if you drafted Cameron Artis-Payne, that first week definitely gave us a bit of a sour note, but more to do with Philip Nelson than Landry Jones. It's looking like Cameron Artis-Payne could end up being the number 1 running back going forward for fantasy purposes. In DC, the defenders, Rashad Ross leads the XFL in 2.94 yards per route run. And I still really think it was really interesting to me to see how many fewer plays Rashad Ross played than both DeAndre Tompkins and Eli Rogers. Like, Rashad Ross only played like 50 to 60% of snaps on Saturday, but every single time they throw it his way, he's like wide open. And I know that obviously they're throwing it to him when he's open, but he didn't play on a lot of the drives. And every time he's out there, it's clear that he's their best receiver just from watching his routes, his ability to create separation at the catch point. Like, if you are sleeping on him from a fantasy perspective, if you were expecting more than you got in the first 2 weeks, which honestly he's been producing pretty well, I still think he's in a buy low moment. I love Rashad Ross going forward, and I think it's just a matter of time before he has that massive 100-yard, 2-touchdown blow-up game where everybody wishes they had him on their team, especially for daily. And this might be the week that it happens, playing against LA, who's given up the most passing yards of any team in the XFL, and also Rashad Ross kind of has a bone to pick with LA with the fact that they traded him in the offseason. So if you love the revenge game narrative for fantasy, this is the week to look at that. DC's defense has allowed a 54.4 passer rating, the leading mark in the XFL, but you also have to remember they've only played Brandon Silvers and Matt McGloin, so this week will be a bit more telling because they get to play a more experienced guy in Josh Johnson. This is definitely a big story right now because Houston's defense didn't look nearly as strong in Week 1 as it did in Week 2, but Houston has pressured opposing quarterbacks on 41% of dropbacks. they're doing a tremendous job of pressuring the quarterback. They lead the league with 8 sacks. I think second best. There is a tie, three-way tie for 5 sacks. So they've done a tremendous job of pressuring the quarterback. And if their offense is able to continue to play at the level that they have been and having a defense that can pressure the quarterback, they're going to be very hard to beat, especially later on in the season. Wildcats, Josh Johnson led the XFL with an average depth of target of 13.8. He took a lot more deep shots than a lot of the other quarterbacks in this league. Didn't connect on all of them. He did get a very nice touchdown to Nelson Spruce towards the end of the day, but look for that trend to continue, and hopefully he'll get a little bit more accurate as he gets more inclined with this team. New York Guardians defensive end Bunmi Rotimi has recorded 8 total pressures from edge defender positions, the most in the XFL. And I mean, we knew before the season started that the Guardians were going to have a really, really good defense. They just got to figure out that offense with Matt McGloin. St. Louis quarterback Jordan Ta'amu has the adjusted completion percentage of 82%, the highest mark among XFL starters. Now, he's not taking nearly as many deep shots as like a Cardale Jones, Josh Johnson, or Landry Jones right now, but he's been playing really well. Definitely under the radar in terms of the MVP watch right now. Everyone's oohing and awing over Philip Walker, but Jordan Ta'amu has been really good. Seattle Dragons. The Dragons have allowed just 0.1 yards per contact before contact per rush attempt, the league's best defensive mark. Like I said, they were playing really well against DC in the run game in week 1, and then Sean Patrick had a decent performance against them in week 2, but they definitely held their own, and a lot of that had to do with the Vipers not being able to throw the ball at all. So should be very interesting. Now you get like the whole whole argument of a movable object, and well, botching this, guys. Sorry, this is what the fun part of doing a live stream. But you get the best running team against the best running defense going against each other with Seattle and Dallas, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think Dallas will prevail. I don't think we have enough information to really determine who is the best defense yet, because we haven't seen enough of these teams play each other to really get a feel for it. So my vote is Dallas wins that battle. And then on the Vipers side, we have Devian Smith and Jacques Patrick ranked first and third, respectively, in total yards. The Vipers, they're the weirdest team right now. They both games that they've played, they've led in total yards. I think they've even led in pass yards both games that they played, and definitely in rush yards. So like they're playing better on offense than the teams they're playing against, and their defense has actually allowed, I think, the least amount of pass yards and the second the second least amount of rush yards against. So they're not giving up a lot of yards, and they're also getting a lot of yards in return, but they've traveled to the red zone 7 times, and they've yet to score an offensive touchdown. So if this team could actually start scoring touchdowns in the red zone, then this would be a completely different story. But I just don't know if Mark Trestman has it in him to actually command this team in the way that they need to be playing right now. But very interesting to see how they handle Houston in their home opener this week. It will be very telling. All right, let's jump over talk real quick about S.J. Green. Now, S.J. Green was getting a lot of hype last week when he was signed to the Seattle Dragons, and then he never showed up inside the building. I don't know whether there's a contract dispute or what happened, but basically, the first news we got on Monday was that he was traded to the Tampa Bay Vipers, and that also led to the Tampa Bay Vipers dropping Sean Tavis-Jones. He was waived at the same time, as well as Mac Brown, to make room for S.J. Green. Now, I think that indicates that they're probably looking to use him right away. I don't know how quickly he can adapt to the system, but I mean, he's very seasoned. He's 34 years old, one of the best receivers to play in the CFL, and it's risky, but he's going to be a very cheap option in DFS this week, and if they do involve him in a game where there's likely going to be a decent amount of points scored, hopefully Tampa Bay can actually convert in the red zone at home. Maybe S.J. Green ends up being the best value in DFS on the week. So very interested to see what the Tampa Bay Vipers will do with him, especially if Aaron Murray ends up coming back, which that's not saying much, but he at least looked a little better than Taylor Cornelius. And then there's also some rumors floating around that Tim Tebow has been in touch with the XFL. I think that would definitely be a very interesting thing for them to try to do. He's been out of football for a while, been playing baseball, obviously, and I think that he is probably going to end up sticking with the Mets um, because I think that's kind of fits more what he's wanted to do right now. But it would be very interesting to see how he would do if he were to come back to football and play in the XFL. Overall, I just think right now, just any interest that can come to the XFL is probably a good thing, and I think Tim Tebow would definitely bring a lot of interest to the XFL for sure. So overall, that's pretty much all we've got in the news this week. We're waiting for the latest injury reports to drop, so that way we can do our game previews for you guys, give you some insight on who to start, who to sit this week, and also give you guys our DFS picks. The last 2 weeks in our DFS rounds, we have been hitting pretty well. I've been 3xing in the lineups that I've been submitting out there, and I've basically been using the lineups I've been giving you guys. So I'm not going to give you guys information that I wouldn't also use myself. That's just a principle of mine. So keep an eye out for that. That should be dropping sometime tomorrow. But thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments on things you want us to discuss in the future, or just any overall improvements or additions to either the channel or the website that you're interested in, make sure you hit me up in the comment section. I'd be more than happy to take a look at that and see what we can do. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow for our game previews.